In this video, I will show you how to create a custom leaderboard with script in Roblox Studio. You may ask, what is wrong with the Roblox Studio's default leaderboard? Well, it only includes text and it is not very eye-catching. With a custom leaderboard, we'll be able to use any background that we want, customize the font, and even add cute player pictures. Before beginning, please subscribe to support the channel for more game development videos. Okay, let's begin. I open up Roblox Studio, create a new file, and I select the base plate template. Now I select Starter GUI and add a screen GUI to that. I rename it as Leaderboard. Under that, I create a frame. I add a UI aspect ratio constraint to my frame. This will ensure that my frame's aspect ratio will be the same on screens with different aspect ratios. For the leaderboard, I'll use an aspect ratio of 0.7 just because it looks good to me as a leaderboard ratio. I change the aspect type to scale with parent size. I click on the frame. I expand the size and the position. I want to change the position to 0.82 for the x-axis and 0.3 for the y-axis so that it sits at a nice position on the player's screen. I don't want any offset. I just want to use scale values to cater for different screen sizes. For the size, I'll use a scale value of 0.15 for the x-axis to make it a bit bigger. I'll clear the offset. I'll also clear the offset of the y-axis. So this will be my leaderboard frame, a blank canvas right now. Of course, you can play with the size and position values based on your game's needs. Inside the frame, I'll create a text label. I click on the plus sign and select text label. For the size, I'll use 1 for the scale of x and 0.1 for the scale of y. This means that it will have the same width as its parent and 1/10 of the height of its parent. This will be the title, so I scroll down, select the text and type leaderboard. Then I'll create another frame under this frame. This frame will hold all the player scores. So I rename it as player scores. Let's rename the uppermost frame as main frame for clarity. Now I'll adjust the position and the size of my new player scores frame. For the position, I type 0.1 for the y-axis because I want it to start right below the text label. I'll keep x as 0. For the size, I want it to be the same width as its parent, so I type 1 for the scale and 0 for the offset of x. For the height, I want it to occupy all the space under the text label, so I type 0.9 for the scale and 0 for the offset of y. Under the player scores frame, I want to add a UI list layout. A UI list layout lays out UI elements under a parent in a single row, horizontally or vertically. To edit, I can just type list and select UI list layout. The behavior settings of this list layout look good to me. I will create another frame under my player scores frame. So this frame will hold the score of one player, so I rename it as player score, singular. Let's adjust its size. I want it to have the same width as its parent frame, so I type 1 for the x scale and 0 for the offset. We will have 10 players in this game, so I want the height to be 1/10 of its parent frame. Hence, I type 0.1 for the y scale and 0 for the offset. If I duplicate this, you can see that we can fit 10 players in here. Let's delete these duplicates. Inside this player score frame, I'll add another UI list layout. I type list to search for the elements that include lists in their names, and I select UI list layout. This time, the fill direction will be horizontal, and the horizontal alignment will be centered. Now I'll start adding information about the players. I'll add an image label under the player score frame. This image label will hold the player's headshot photo. So I rename it as player photo. I want to have a UI aspect ratio constraint for the image to be square shaped. So the aspect ratio will be 1. The dominant axis will be height because I want the height of the square to be the height of the parent frame. And for the aspect type, I select scale with parent size. As you can see, the square fit inside the parent frame as soon as I selected that. I want to adjust the size of the player photo frame as well. I want 0 for all values other than the y scale. Now I am done with setting up the player photo. I want to add 2 more elements to the player score frame. The first one is a text label. I rename it as player name as it will hold the name of the player. For its size, I want 0.7 for the x scale and 1 for the y scale. Here you can see the label. I want to add the last element, which will be another text label that will hold the player score. For its size, I want 0.16 for the x scale and 1 for the y scale. As you can see, this player score frame now holds 3 elements: the player's picture, their name, and their score. If I duplicate it, it repeats itself nicely and we'll be able to accommodate up to 10 players with this setup. Now I want to add a background image. I add an image label to the mainframe and rename it as background. I adjust its z-index as -1 so that it appears below the other elements. Z-index determines the order in which a GUI element is rendered to the screen relative to other GUI elements. I adjust its size as 1 for the X and Y scales and 0 for the offsets. I want it to fill up all the space and I don't want any offset. Offsets are very prone to being positioned weirdly or cut off due to different screen sizes. Hence, I avoid using them and use scale for UI elements instead. Now, I want to get rid of the borders of these UI elements, so I select all the UI elements that has a border, which are frames, images, and text here, and set border size pixel as 0. I also don't want any background for these elements. I'll add my own background image and I don't want any background for text and such. So I set transparency as 1. During the game, I will clone this player score with script. So I drag and drop it under the replicated storage. Replicated storage is a general container service in Roblox Studio for objects that are available to both the server and the connected game clients. When needed, I'll access it from the replicated storage and clone it inside the mainframe. So let's create a script for this. I'll select Server Script Service and create a script. I'll call it Leaderboard Manager, so we promote the script to a manager. First, we need to keep track of the players. So I'll use the players service to get information about the players. For that, I'll type local players service is equal to game colon get service players. I create a local variable here and fill it in with the players service of the game. Then I'll create a table to add the players as they join the game. So I create a local table named all players. It is currently empty, but I'll fill it later. I'll use players service.playerEdit event to keep track of the added players. When a player is added, this event will be called and I'll connect to that event with a function, and the player information will be automatically included here. I'll add some information about the player here. There will be a local score variable, and to fill it in, I'll instantiate a new integer value to store the score of the player. The variable's name will be score, and score.value will be 0 initially when a player is first added. I'll type score.parent is equal to player to make this a child of the player. Let's see if this is working. I pressed play, and after my character is added, if I expand it, I can see that score has been added to it. And since I changed the variable's name to score, I see it as score here. I'll create another variable called username, make it equal to instance.new string value because it will be a name, hence string. Then I'll set the variable's name, so username.name will be username. This is to distinguish it easily in the Explorer. And I'll get the user's username, hence I write username.value is equal to player.name. Again, I'll make the parent of this variable player. Finally, I'll create a local thumbnail variable to hold the headshot image of the players. I'll instantiate a string value because this will store the link to the thumbnail. Again, thumbnail.name will be thumbnail. To get the thumbnail, I'll create some local variables. The first one will be thumb type and it will be enum.thumbnailType.headshot. Enum is a special data type that can take one of a set of values. In Roblox Studio, there are several pre-created enums including thumbnail type. I want the headshot, which shows the headshot of the user's avatar. The second variable will be thumb size, and it will be equal to enum.thumbnailSize.size 420 by 420. It is the resolution of the headshot. Now I'll create two variables called content and isReady, and I'll call the getUserThumbnailAsync function of the player service, which will fetch the content URL of a player thumbnail. It takes in user ID, which will be player.userID. It asks for thumbnail type and thumbnail size, which I just created variables for. So I pass them in. So I'll get a link of the thumbnail with this function. Then, when it's ready, I'll use that information and fill in the thumbnail.value with it. And finally, like previously, thumbnail.parent will be player. I press play. We have score, username, and thumbnail under the player. And in thumbnail, we can see the value is written, so we can use this information for the thumbnail content. So when a player is added, we fill this information in. But we also need to insert it to the all players table. For that, I write table.insert. To which table? All players table. and we'll add player to this table. We should also remove a player if they quit the game. For this, I'll use the player removing event. I'll access it using my local player service variable. I'll connect to the service with a function, and again the player information will be provided automatically. Here I'll use table.remove. It asks me which table. I type all players, then it asks me the index of the element I want to remove. I write table.find, and inside I type all players, which is the table's name, and then player, which is the player we want to remove. The find function will return the index of the player, and the remove function will remove it from the all players table. This is how we can keep track of all players. We should also let all clients know when there's a change in the leaderboard. For that, I'll create an event. I select replicated storage and I select remote event. I rename it as leaderboard changed. Every time a new player is added or removed, leaderboard should reflect that change. So I need to call this leaderboard changed event. For that, I'll type here local leaderboard changed is equal to game.replicated storage. This is where we are storing that event. And .leaderboard changed. I will fire this event here after a player is inserted to the table. So I type leaderboard changed, fire all clients. And inside that, I'll pass in all players as an argument. So whatever is listening to that event will be able to get this information. I will do the same thing right after a player is removed from the table as well. I just copy and paste. So this is how we let the local scripts know that they need to update their copy of the leaderboard. I now create a local script called leaderboard inside the leaderboard GUI. And here I will create some variables to access elements. Local mainframe is equal to script.parent.mainframe. I'll also type local player scores is equal to mainframe.playerscores. This is going to be the parent object of the player score elements when they are added. Also, I will create a reference to the player score elements. So here I type local leaderboard player template to distinguish it from other variables is equal to, I'll get this player score that I created. So game.replicatedStorage.playerScore. And finally, I'll write a local variable named leaderboard changed, and it is the event which is at the same place, replicated storage, so is equal to game.replicatedStorage.leaderboard changed. I will use this variable to call a function. So when onClient event is fired, to understand, I need to connect to that. And if so, I will call the function updateUI. Now I'll create that function. Local function named updateUI. Let's call it _players since we are sharing the information of all players. And we'll be using this information to update the UI. But before doing that, I will create another table named player score frames. It will store all frames that are created for different users. Remember, frames refer to rows that include the username, picture, and score of a player. And here inside the function, I'll check if the number of players is larger than the number of frames we have created so far. At the beginning of the game, the player score frames should have no elements, so it should be 0. But as the game progresses, the number of player score frames will change according to the number of players. And here we should check if we have enough player score frames for each player. To do that, I'll write an if statement. If number of player score frames is less than number of underscore players, which means that we need to create more leaderboard player template and add it to the player score frames table. Here I'll create a for loop because we may need to add more than one. For I is equal to number of player score frames plus 1, we start from plus 1 and we go until number of players and we increment one by one. Inside the for loop, I create a local frame variable and fill it in with a clone of the leaderboard player template. After cloning it, I'll use the frame variable to refer to that. And I'll get a parent and set it to player scores. I also need to keep track of the player score frames. So player score frames I will be frame as well. So we will store that information inside the player score frames table as well. On the other hand, if a player quits the game, we will have more frames than the number of players. If this is the case, we can write if number of player score frames is greater than number of underscore players, then we'll destroy some. Again, I write a for loop here because we may need to destroy more than one if more than one player quits the game. This time it will be number of underscore players plus 1 because this is a smaller value now. It will go until number of player score frames and it will increment by 1. Inside the for loop, I'll write player score frames I, destroy. And also, I'll set player score frames I as nil, because I want it to be empty now. So far, we have added or removed some player score frames to match the number with the number of players. Now we'll change the information. I'll create another for loop. For I and v in I pairs, underscore players. So for every player inside the underscore players table, we'll write player score frames I dot player name dot text. Because this is a UI text label, we'll change the text property of that. And it will be underscore players I dot username dot value. It was a string value and we can reach its value by using dot value. We should also change the score for that player. Player score frames I dot player score dot text is equal to underscore players I dot score dot value. And we should also change the player picture. So player score frames I dot player photo dot image is equal to underscore players I dot thumbnail dot value. If I press play, after my character is added to the game, I can see my name, my picture, and my score here. Now I want to test it with multiple users. I click start here with 3 players, and there are 3 windows with 3 different players. And there are 3 players on my leaderboard. If I close one of the windows, it will be updated and there will be 2 players. If I close another one, the leaderboard will be updated again. We can test for multiple users like this. Let's create some functionality for the scores as well. I go to the workspace, create a part, call it coin. I'll change its shape to cylinder. I'll move it, change its size so that it resembles a coin. I'll move it up a bit. I'll select the material as neon to give it some glam and select the brick color as yellow. So this will be a coin that players can collect. The player will collect the coin when they touch it. I'll add a script inside the coin part, change the script's name to coin. I'll write local coin is equal to script.parent to access the coin part. Then I'll look for coin.touched and I'll connect to that event with a function and we can use the other part information with that touched event. I'll type local model is equal to other part colon find first ancestor of class model. So we are looking if there's a model as an ancestor of that other part. If there's a model, and if that model has a humanoid, which we can check by typing model colon find first child which is a humanoid, then this means it is a player. It can be an NPC or a human player. Then I'll call coin colon destroy to destroy the coin. Before that though, I need the leaderboard manager know that a user has touched that coin, increasing their score. For that, I'll create a bindable event under server storage. I want communication between server scripts, hence I put the event under server storage. I rename it as coin collected. Here in the script, I'll type local coin collected is equal to game.serverstorage.coincollected. And here, before destroying the coin, I'll fire that event by passing in model. I am passing in the model to let the leaderboard manager understand which player's score will be increased. I copy this line and go to the leaderboard manager script, and here I paste it. At the bottom, I type coincollected.event::connect. I'll write a function here. I'll use a name for the model. It will be character because the model of a player is character. Now I want to find the player of the character. I can do that by calling player service getPlayer from character, and I'll type character here. So this is the player here. And we collect all the players inside the all players table. To find this player, inside that I'll type table.find all players player. And I'll access its score.value and increment it by 1. So every coin will be worth 1 points. Then I call this leaderboard change fire all clients all players again because the score is changed. So the leaderboard should change as well. I go back to the game editor and duplicate some coins around the spawn location and create a circle of coins. Select the coins, anchor them, deselect can collide so that they won't block the player. Here, as I collect coins, you can see that the score in the leaderboard gets increased. Let's run a multiplayer test with 2 players. The one on the left is player 2, the one on the right is player 1. I collect some coins with player 1, its score gets increased. And now let's collect some with player 2. One thing you probably noticed is that this is not in the correct order. Usually, the idea of a leaderboard is to show the player with the highest score on the top. and go from there in a decreasing order. So I need to implement that. Creating a custom leaderboard is a lot of work. Here, my player scores frame has a UI list layout and the sort order is set to layout order. So I will use this information to sort my leaderboard. Here in the leaderboard manager script, after setting these values, I'll write player score frames I.layout order is equal to minus underscore players I score.value. Why minus? Because we want the highest value on the top instead of the bottom. I press start again for 2 players. Let me get rid of these panes so that you can see better. I am collecting some coins. Let's start with player 2. Now let's collect some coins with player 1. As soon as player 1 collects 3 coins, it climbs up to the top of the leaderboard. Similarly, let's increase the score of player 2. As soon as it collects 5 points, the leaderboard gets sorted and player 2 is at the top now. Now I want to make my leaderboard look prettier. I previously created a background image in Photoshop. I'll use that image. Let's find the background image inside the starter GUI. I click next to image, select add image and select my image file. We can now see the background image here. Let's improve the leaderboard even more. Currently, all players are displayed the same, but it is a good practice for the player to see themselves highlighted for easier progress tracking of their own. For this, I'll get the player's service. And here I'll create a local player variable and make it equal to player's service.localPlayer. And here I write if the current player underscore players I is equal to local player, then I'll change the player score frames I's background transparency to 0.5. We had changed the transparency of all elements to 1 before, so having a 0.5 transparency for a white background will serve as a highlight. Nice trick, huh? Else I'll set it to 1. Let's start a test with 2 players again. As you can see, each player sees themselves as highlighted on their own local leaderboard. Here, you can also see the default leaderboard. But now we have a custom leaderboard, and a prettier one at that, so I don't need the default leaderboard. I can disable it by using the setCoreGUI enabled function. So inside my leaderboard script, here at the top, I'll type game.starterGUI : setCoreGUI enabled. And inside, I'll use enum.coreGUI type, because the default leaderboard is a core GUI type. And I'll disable the player list by passing in false for the second argument. Let's play again. As you can see, there is no default leaderboard here, and our very own custom-made leaderboard is here looking pretty and all. So this is how you can create a custom leaderboard in Roblox Studio with script. If you made it to this point of the video, thank you very much for watching. If you found the video useful, please like and subscribe to support the channel for more videos. If you want a new game development tutorial, let me know down in the comments. You can get access to the Roblox project file from Patreon. The link is in the description. Again, thanks for watching and see you in the next video.